Hello, thank you for joining us today and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ben Miller, as always joined by Alicia, and today's topic is going to be the update on dietary fiber. As always, to do a little bit of background, ESHA research was established in 1981 as one of the very first nutrition software solutions. Today we offer a number of solutions including Genesis R&D Food, Genesis R&D Supplements, the food processor, and many different options for consulting services. Today we're going to look at the Genesis Food application. Genesis was initially released in 1991 and is designed for a number of uses including product development, formulation analysis, menu analysis, reporting, and regulatory compliance. We do have one upcoming webinar on our schedule that's going to be working with recipes, kind of like we did working with ingredients a couple months ago. That's going to be on April 24th. And we will certainly sign up some more later in 2019. We just don't have any set right now because of some personal questions of when people will be around. But certainly stay tuned. We'll send out that information in e-newsletters and that sort of stuff later on. And if you ever want to sign up, you can visit that on our website or watch the old ones, including this one. Please note, as always, this webinar is being recorded. All of our webinars are available, as I mentioned, on our website if you want to watch those past webinars. If you have questions, submit those questions in the GoToWebinar control panel. Certainly ask questions along the way. We've got a handful of people today answering questions. So ask questions and we'll get those answered as quickly as we can. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alicia. She's going to take us through that topic today.
All right. I'm hoping you can hear me. And again, thanks everybody, all of our attendees. Thanks for the feedback. We want to, of course, share this content with you. So we appreciate your presence and of course appreciate you letting us know that you can hear us okay. And again, we have a lot of content to cover today. And Ben mentioned we will be recording this. We are recording this. So if you need to revisit some of the topic and content that we do discuss today, you'll get that recording a little later on. So in May of 2016, we saw the significant overhaul of the nutrition facts panel, and included in the 2016 label format changes, the FDA introduced an established definition for dietary fiber. The dietary reference value for dietary fiber is 28 grams, and that's an increase from the previous 25 grams. Per the CFR, dietary fiber is defined as non-digestible soluble and insoluble carbohydrates with 3 or more monomeric units and lignin that are intrinsic and intact in plants, or isolated or synthetic non-digestible carbohydrates with 3 or more monomeric units determined by the FDA to have physiological effects that are beneficial to human health. And that's quite a mouthful. And it may include some terms that are unfamiliar to some of us. In an attempt to describe some of these terms simply and briefly, we have non-digestible carbohydrates, which generally speaking include foods or components of the foods that our enzymes don't entirely break down, so they may primarily pass through our systems. Dietary fibers are non-digestible carbohydrates, but not all non-digestible carbohydrates are considered dietary fiber under the FDA 2016 label definition. For the 2016 US label, the key is physiologically beneficial. The FDA indicates that dietary fiber is to demonstrate some form of health benefit or health risk reduction in order for the non-digestible carbohydrates to be considered beneficial to human health and therefore dietary fiber. We have intrinsic and intact. With whole foods, we see non-digestible carbohydrates that are intact and naturally occurring. Eat the whole food, get the benefit of the fibers that are included. Whole produce, grains, seeds, and some processed forms of foods are examples of those containing intact and intrinsic dietary fibers. Intact meaning that no considerable component has been removed, and intrinsic referring to naturally occurring in the original form or minimally processed form of the food. Non-digestible carbohydrates that are not intrinsic or intact are subject to scientific review to determine if they provide physiological benefit to human health. In the processing of some ingredients, the non-digestible carbohydrates may become so isolated, or they may be a result of specific manufacturing or synthetically manufactured that has been shown that it has not been shown that they provide beneficial effects required to meet the 2016 definition of dietary fiber. In the past, some of these isolated or synthetic ingredients were considered and marketed as dietary fiber. Upon review, some were determined to be in line with the 2016 dietary fiber definition due to benefits that they provide, while others did not meet that standard. We have resistant starches, and I'll provide a little more detail for those in a few slides, and enforcement discretion. That's a term used by the FDA indicating that when evaluating labels or information, they will consider the context of the information reported and the specific regulation in question to determine if corrective action is required. This acknowledges that we're working off a fair amount of guidance documents that still need to make their way to final rule, and industry is moving ahead on practices stated in the guidance based on the FDA's current thinking. So we hope that this embraces a spirit of cooperation as we all transition to the 2016 label formats, which again include major changes and new definitions for which we see various levels of understanding and application. The FDA has provided much technical detail on dietary fiber, so I refer you to the FDA guidance and the Q&A on dietary fiber. There have been several documents published on this topic since the 2016 labeling rules went into effect. As step by step, we have seen more clarification on dietary fiber under the 2016 regulations. You may have followed the developments, or some of this may be new to you, and we hope that today's discussion brings you up to speed. When the 2016 regulations were first introduced, we saw the official definition of dietary fiber for U.S. labeling purposes. Later in 2016, we saw comments on the citizen petition and scientific evidence review process that would be applied in determining which isolated and synthetic non-digestible carbohydrates would be considered physiologically beneficial and therefore deemed dietary fiber for 2016 U.S. labeling. FDA released Q&A for industry on dietary fiber that they have continued to update. In 2017, the Q&A listed non-digestible carbohydrates that were under review as potential dietary fibers, that is, those that were making their way through the proper channels of evaluation. And in February 2018, the FDA listed final guidance on the evaluation of scientific evidence criteria. And then, in June 2018, additional guidance was released. The June 2018 guidance, titled The Declaration of Certain Isolated or Synthetic Non-Digestible Carbohydrates as Dietary Fiber on Nutrition and Supplement Facts labels, brings us up to date at this time on FDA's direction on dietary fiber. And this guidance includes a list of additional isolated and synthetic non-digestible carbohydrates that were subjected to scientific review and that the FDA determined meet the 2016 definition of dietary fiber. Some of these items were actively submitted by industry and went through the citizens petition process, and some were evaluated at FDA's initiative. The guidance also discusses the general term mixed plant cell wall fibers. It presents a proposal for factoring calories based on 1 calorie per gram of polydextrose, and it comments on the record-keeping and enforcement discretion applied to the reporting of foods that contain a combination of final rule dietary fiber and guidance dietary fiber ingredients. From the combination of the June 2018 and earlier guidance, we have a list of isolated and synthetic non-digestible carbohydrates that are considered dietary fiber under the FDA definition. And these are arabinoxylan, alginate, beta-glucan, cellulose, galacto-oligosaccharide, guar, high amylose starch, hydroxypropylmethylcellulose, inulin and inulin-type fructans, locust bean gum, mixed plant cell wall fibers, pectin, polydextrose, psyllium husk, and resistant maltodextrin and dextrins. The fibers indicated here with the asterisk are those that were declared in the June 2018 guidance. So these are in addition to fiber discussions included in some of the earlier FDA documents and information that ESHA has shared. So back to that idea that not all non-digestible carbohydrates are proven to be beneficial. We still have a list of isolated or synthetic non-digestible carbohydrates lacking complete review or clear scientific evidence of providing benefit to human health. These cannot be declared as dietary fiber at this time. We refer to these as non-beneficial, non-digestible carbohydrates. For 2016 labeling, carbohydrates from these are included in the reported total carbohydrate value, but they're not included in the dietary fiber value. And these non-beneficial, non-digestible carbohydrates are carboxymethylcellulose, gum acacia, coria gum, pullulan, retrograded cornstarch, resistant wheat and maize starch, xanthan gum, and xylo-oligosaccharides. These lists are not set in stone. The FDA will continue to review citizen petitions for non-digestible carbohydrates that are submitted. So depending on industry or special interest action, we could see new additional ingredients added to the dietary fibers list or move from this non-beneficial list to the dietary fibers list if scientific evidence supports doing so. Of course, ingredients can go by a variety of names, or the dietary fiber may commonly occur in specific ingredients listed by their common names in ingredient statements. And here's an example from a list that our consulting team maintains to track and describe various fibers and terms to look for. As an example, regarding inulin and inulin-type fructans, we often see chicory root in an ingredient list indicating the presence of inulin as dietary fiber. You see locust bean gum has an alias of Caribbean gum, and the FDA lists mixed plant cell wall fibers in their most recent guidance, and they provide a lengthy yet not all-inclusive list of examples. But you can see here specific fibers like apple fiber, bamboo fiber, oat hull fiber, pea fiber, and others. So there's a bit of translation required when we're working with fiber ingredients. Resistant starches come from various forms, sources, and processes. And some meet the definition of dietary fiber, some do not. Here is a list of descriptions and sources and uses of resistant starches. We have RS1, occurs as intrinsic and intact. RS2 occurs in some whole foods and some processed ingredients. RS3 is a product of processing where the starch chains crystallize, but they maintain resistance to digestion. RS4 can be a result of chemical processing, with the top two in blue meeting the dietary fiber definition, but the bottom two in pink, depending on their source, may not meet the definition. For example, retrograded cornstarch, which is RS3, and resistant wheat and maize starches, RS4, are on the list of non-beneficial, non-digestible carbohydrates at this time. But again, stay tuned for future guidance. Some of these could change depending on efforts and evidence submitted to the FDA for review. And there's much more technical information out there regarding the resistant starches, but your pliers may be able to best comment on their specific products and where they fall in these classifications. ESHA provides cheat sheets for many of the 2016 labeling topics. For your reference, here's the cheat sheet for Dietary Fiber 2016, recapping a lot of what I presented already and showing the labeling rules for declaration and rounding. And the cheat sheets are available on the ESHA website. So we have a bit of tracking to do when working with dietary fiber information. The CFR states that manufacturers are required to make and keep records verifying the amount of dietary fiber in the labeling of food when a mixture of dietary fiber and added non-digestible carbohydrates that does not meet the definition of dietary fiber is present in the food. But again, because not everyone is up to speed on the application of the definition, or not all sources provide detail in clear and common language, we really have to take a careful look at the information. On supplier data sheets, we're looking for 2016 label information or comments to clarify fiber data reported. We might be able to determine the dietary fiber content based on the nature of the food or ingredient itself. For instance, with whole foods, where the fibers are all intact and intrinsic, we know that the dietary fiber would be as reported. So the total dietary fiber reported would also apply to a 2016 label. For ingredients that are or that contain isolated non-digestible carbohydrates that meet the 2016 FDA definition of dietary fiber, we can also determine the 2016 dietary fiber content as reported. So again, those are that meet the definition of dietary fibers or that ingredient contains only dietary fibers. For mixed foods, however, if dietary fiber 2016 is not reported, you may need to contact the supplier. And to help you store the proper documentation for dietary fiber information, Genesis provides notes fields and the ability to add attachments to your ingredient and recipe records. Genesis also includes the audit trail feature to help document changes made to records. The reality is we still see many blanks to fill. Some of the challenges in creating watertight documentation are that data might be reported as just dietary fiber with no further context comments. So determining if global versus US, let alone 1990 versus 2016 US definitions were applied may be quite challenging. The ingredient list states the common or usual name as required, so we may be experiencing a lack of translation from the regulatory and guidance terms to ingredient list names. Resistant starches, for example, we may see that those terms used in the product description on a spec sheet, but we wouldn't expect to see the specific resistant classification included in an ingredient list. And suppliers may not be able to provide the information that you request if they are waiting for clarification from their suppliers. So ingredients within an ingredients may affect the progression of reported data. Some of the isolated non-digestible carbohydrates are determined by their level of processing. So this takes a deeper understanding when tracking and documenting fibers versus non-digestible carbohydrates. And the compliance date is approaching. So here is my plea to suppliers. Consider providing context with your nutritional information. If you are providing data to U.S. manufacturers as part of your documentation, make sure that your product information includes reference to 1990 versus 2016 U.S. labeling. Perhaps report total dietary fiber and 26 dietary fiber values if you can. Include footnotes or comments on data sheets to help clarify the fiber information reported, and help educate your customers about the nature of the products and how they relate to the FDA labeling terms. To help you track the information you need, in Genesis we have several fiber-related fields that can be populated. To help break it down, you can see this lovely color-coded approach to viewing the Genesis field. The top green fields are the total dietary fiber fields. These reflect dietary fiber values in relation to the 1990 U.S. labels, as well as fiber outside of the U.S. regulation, so total dietary fiber. The middle blue section shows the dietary fiber 2016 fields. These are specifically for reporting dietary fiber values on the U.S. 2016 label, and those are the ones considered beneficial by FDA definition. So again, that's dietary fiber 2016 and for US labeling purposes. The bottom pink fields are the non-beneficial, non-digestible carbohydrates. So the portion of the non-digestible carbohydrates that do not meet the FDA 2016 definition for dietary fiber. We could have named these pink fields non-beneficial, non-digestible carbohydrates, but those names are already lengthy enough as it is, so we're hoping that you can just make that connection. And of course, you see total lines as well as fields for soluble and insoluble determinations. For labeling purposes, for the US 1990 label and outside of the US, you must populate the total dietary fiber field. For US 2016 labeling purposes, you must populate the dietary fiber 2016 field. And if you're declaring soluble and insoluble fibers, you want to populate the corresponding soluble and insoluble fields. And for record keeping, you would want to populate as much information as you can. So if you have total dietary fiber and dietary fiber 2016 information, those green and blue fields, you might be able to calculate the non-digestible fibers, or excuse me, non-digestible carbohydrates, the pink fields. If you have dietary fiber 2016 and non-digestible carbohydrate information, so the blue and the pink fields, you might be able to populate the total dietary fibers fields, the green fields, if needed. If all of your labels are US and 2016, then you may be only concerned with the blue and the pink sections. However, if you are exporting to outside of the US, then you will still need to maintain the total dietary fiber information. In Genesis, when working with supplier ingredients, again, it's best practice to populate as much of the fiber-related fields as you can. For ESHA database items, that is the foods and the ingredients that ship with Genesis, we have populated the dietary fiber 2016 field for many foods and ingredients and will continue to update items as we learn more and see more 2016 data from suppliers. We have applied the definitions of intrinsic and intact to whole foods, and we review ingredient lists to determine dietary fiber 2016 content where we can. We've also marked the non-beneficial, isolated non-digestible carbohydrate ingredients with 0 fibers at this time, and we'll continue to update those as definitions change. And for supplier items that are reporting dietary fiber in terms of 2016 US labels, we continue to populate the total dietary fiber fields when we can so that ingredients used outside of the US 2016 label are reported properly. Maintaining a current subscription of your software ensures that you receive uninterrupted software updates. And just a reminder that we have recorded webinars that speak more to transitioning to the 2016 US label, as well as working with and adding ingredients in Genesis, and we'll provide links to those in the follow-up message. This slide demonstrates the concept of reviewing the ingredient list to support the reported dietary fiber values, information that we might hope to see on a data sheet, as well as how that information might be translated into the fields in Genesis. The datasheet reports a total dietary fiber value that is greater than the dietary fiber 2016 value, and it includes clarification regarding US 2016 labeling. So we have a couple checks in place that give us the context that we need. The ingredient list shows ingredients that we know would contribute either to dietary fiber 2016 or to the non-digestible carbohydrates, such as blueberries contain intact and intrinsic dietary fiber. The xanthan gum and the carboxymethylcellulose contribute to the non-digestible carbohydrates. From the prior list, we know that at this time, those last two fall under the non-beneficial category. And in Genesis, we record the total dietary fiber in the total dietary fiber field. We record the 2016 fiber in the dietary 2016 field, and we calculate the non-digestible carbohydrates based on the difference. So you can see this is a simplified example to show this concept. Certainly, real-world ingredient lists may not be quite so simple. Genesis will calculate a number of nutrients for you with the nutrient calculator tool. Dietary fiber and non-digestible carbohydrates are included in this calculator, but please be aware that the calculator applies when the total dietary fiber in your ingredient or your recipe qualifies as either all beneficial or all non-beneficial. The question that Genesis asks you when it's prompting you to calculate those is really based on either or. Genesis can't calculate from a combination of fibers versus non-digestible carbohydrates because this is a human determination. When you indicate that all of the reported total dietary fiber is either beneficial or non-beneficial, then Genesis will populate the fields appropriately. So it places the proper number in the dietary fiber field, 2016 fields, and then the proper numbers in the non-digestible carbohydrates fields for you. And here's to show you an example of what may happen if you don't populate the correct fields. In Genesis, you might see the 1990 label with complete information per the 1990 requirements. And then if you switch your recipes label to the 2016 format, you would see appropriate formatting changes applied and new nutrients reported. But note the dashes on the dietary fiber line here. for the quantitative amount and the percent DV. This is obviously not a compliant label. So in Genesis, if you see dashes on a label, this means that none of the ingredients in your recipe have values populated for the Dietary Fiber 2016 field. To resolve this, you want to go back to each ingredient record and populate the Dietary Fiber 2016 field for each ingredient. And note here that you will see a dietary fiber value reported on the label if any of the ingredients in your recipe report Dietary Fiber 2016. So if your recipe contains 9 ingredients and only one of those is reporting dietary fiber information, you would still see a value on your label for dietary fiber, but it could be severely underreported. So best practice is to review the spreadsheet report, period, for all recipes. We say this many times in our webinars and we'll continue to repeat that because it's so very important when working with Genesis. The best way to review your recipes in Genesis is to take a look at the spreadsheet report. The spreadsheet report shows you the nutritional detail of each ingredient, and it also identifies missing data. So you can see dashes in the Dietary Fiber 2016 field for a couple of ingredients here. You'll want to fill in those blanks. And in the sample recipe, we have xanthan gum that we know at this time contributes non-beneficial, non-digestible carbohydrates. We also see a gluten-free baking flour, and this is a type of product that has ingredients within the ingredient. So that needs to be looked at more closely. Refer to the product information for that ingredient to see if it contains all dietary fiber contributing ingredients or if it contains non-beneficial, non-digestible carbohydrates, and contact the supplier if you need to fill in those blanks. To populate the dietary fiber information, you want to open each ingredient record that is missing data and fill that in. So here you would open the ingredient record for the xanthan gum and populate the dietary fiber 2016 field with 0 and populate the non-digestible carbohydrate field with the proper number. And then you would want to research the gluten-free flour item, and when you have the proper data for that, open that ingredient record and populate the correct dietary fiber 2016 and non-digestible carbohydrates data. Again, the dietary fiber 2016 field reports on the 2016 US label. The non-digestible carbohydrates field serves as part of your record keeping. And one note in Genesis, when you update an ingredient record, then those changes move forward to any recipes that contain that ingredient and subsequently the label or the labels that are connected with those recipes. And one more note regarding the spreadsheet, you can see here that the set of nutrients I have selected include both the total dietary fiber and the dietary fiber 2016 fields. So this is a custom set of nutrients to view that I created so that as we transition to the 2016 labels, I can see what was previously reported as dietary fiber, and it gives me reference for the dietary fiber 2016. So I can compare those, or if 2016 is missing, I still have a reference that that ingredient may be, or it should be reporting dietary fiber. And Ben will mention a little more about nutrients to view in the software in just a moment. So one more reference that I want to provide is the link to the FDA resources and contact page regarding industry food labeling issues. If you need to reach out to the FDA for clarification on dietary fiber issues, this is one avenue in which to do so. We have used the inquiry form on this page and have been grateful for answers that we've received from the FDA and clarification on many topics from the CFR. And we look forward to future guidance that helps solidify the specifics of dietary fiber. With that, I'll turn it over to Ben to show you where some of the fields and features that I've talked about can be found in Genesis.
All right, thank you, Alicia. Get over into the Genesis software. I do already have an ingredient pulled up. I just have an apple from the USDA. That's what I'm going to show you as my example for our first piece that we're going to look at. She mentioned it as we went through the slides, but we'll take a look at it inside of the application as well, looking at those fiber fields. Right now, if I wanted to take a look at what fields I currently have shown, I can go into the Home tab, click on Nutrients to View in Genesis, and right now I'm showing US label mandatory nutrients. So with that, we have total dietary fiber. And this is going to be the 1990 regulations. So we're going to see total dietary fiber, but we're not seeing the 2016 dietary fiber field. We're going to see the 2016 dietary fiber field. We can go over in the 2016 mandatory nutrients. But at that point, now we're just seeing the 2016 field. We can do one of a couple of things. The easiest way, if you just want to click on Show All Nutrients, you'll just have that full list in the exact order that Alicia had them shown right here, so long as you don't have alphabetized nutrients checked. If you check that, then obviously they're going to get an alphabetical order, so fiber is going to get taken apart from each other because they're just put in that alphabetical order. So if you're looking for all 9 really quick and easy, you can certainly do that. You can also set up your own personal nutrients to view list if you'd like. If you want to have just the 2016 mandatory fields, but then include fiber for 1990 as well, we could modify our list, starting with the list that we already have selected here. And go ahead and modify. We'll start with the list of items that we have already preset, which is the 2016 mandatory nutrients. Click Edit, and now we can modify that list to however we would like. If we wanted to add just in total dietary fiber, we can add that. Slide it up to next to dietary fiber 2016, either above or below, and go from there. If we wanted all of the fiber fields, we could certainly add those as well. So again, it depends on what all you're wanting to take a look at inside of your nutrients to view. And if you wanted to simply have just fiber and that's it, we could remove some of those other ones too. So now we just have the dietary fiber fields, nothing else included. And I could save a nutrients to view profile that's just fiber or all fiber nutrients, something along those lines. So you can switch back and forth really easily and quickly. I'll go ahead and do that now. I'm just going to save as. Make sure you do a save as when you save your nutrients file, especially if you have one of the preset ones, like the US label 2016 mandatory one. You don't want to save over the top of that. Let's call this fibers, save, and now we have that fibers list down. Now when I hit OK, uncheck show all nutrients, it's just going to show those fiber fields in the order that I had it selected. One other thing to note, as we've noted the last couple of times during our webinars, notes and attachments. Attachments are a relatively new piece in Genesis. I guess it's really not anymore. It's been a little over a year now that it's been in the program, but it still feels fairly new. But attachments, if you're getting a new spec sheet from your supplier, if you're getting fiber data from your supplier, you get it a PDF or a Word document or whatever else it might be, take that file and just upload it right into the program. You can just drag and drop from your folder right into here, or you can browse to select a file to upload into your attachments. Gives you a great resource and receptacle of documents so that you know where all of that data is. And then of course the notes field's down here as well. If you wanted to make one of your notes fields specific about fiber, if that's your industry and you're doing it a lot, one of your notes fields could certainly just be fiber details or something along those lines, or of course however you would like to structure that. But the notes fields are a great resource for adding data in and that maybe doesn't fit any of the other fields. And then we'll go ahead and close this ingredient. I'm going to go ahead and open a recipe. I'll do my barley chopped salad that I always do. And then as Alicia said, spreadsheet, a whole bunch more spreadsheet. It's so important. And we will say that during every webinar, especially when we talk about fiber, added sugars, those sorts of fields, because it's incredibly important. Looking at my layout now, I've got all of my fibers shown inside of my spreadsheet report. So now we can see my soluble fiber fields are missing. I don't have a lot of data on that, but aside from that, I've got a lot of data from a lot of the other places. Excuse me. Total fiber 2016, and non-digestible carbohydrates field. So if I want to just look at those, I've got the data that I need for those specific fields. But again, depending on your items, whether they're user created or ESHA ingredients, certainly take a look at this area to make sure that that data is there and makes sense. And of course, also make sure that you have the data for the label that you're wanting to make. If you're doing a 2016 US label, make sure that Fiber 2016 doesn't have any dashes in it. If you're doing a 1990 label or a label for another country, Canada, Mexico, EU, make sure that total fibers field is filled out. If you're doing just Canada and that's it, 2016 might not be important to you because obviously it's a US field. So again, make sure you have the data that you need for your situation. At the very least, more data is certainly a lot better than less data, but make sure you have all of the data that you possibly need. And with that, if anyone else is feeling like they need some training like I do, we have some trainings coming up. All of them are going to be in our Oak Brook, Illinois facility, the ESHA training facility. The next one is going to be April 10th and 11th, which I think is pretty soon here if it's not already going on right now. Nope, next month. Sorry, I'm off by a month. So our professional training will be a month from now. We also have another professional training May 15th and 16th. And then we have our professional Genesis menu label training, more restaurant styled training, June 19th and 20th. If you would like any more information on those, or if you would like to sign up for them, or look at the full schedule, we have a lot more on our full training schedule. You can view that on our website. With that, we'll get into a couple of questions. I wanted to note really quick, our marketing manager is out of the office today, so the follow-up email that you generally get pretty quickly after the webinar is over and it being posted on our website might take a little bit extra time. It probably will be available tomorrow instead of today. So a little bit there, just don't panic if you don't see the email. It might just be a little bit later than average. But if you do want to contact us, if you have any questions about your account, purchasing Genesis, adding licenses, anything like that, call our sales line. If you have any questions about support, nutrition sorts of questions, you can call our support line, or if you would like label reviews, us to create labels for you, you can call our consulting services. And as always, we have all of those helpful resources, our LinkedIn page, our blog, e-newsletter, e-learning center, where this will be so much more information. With that, we'll get into our questions. Looks like we have about 5 that we're going to address today. The first question, which we went over a little bit here, but first question is going to be, why are there 2 fields for dietary fiber in Genesis?
Yeah, thanks. So common question, very common since the new label was introduced in Genesis. And again, previous content that we showed today explains that in detail, but it was necessary to add the 2016 dietary fiber fields to accommodate that FDA 2016 definition. Genesis couldn't use one field to cover both purposes, especially during this transition period. But again, we have to maintain that total dietary fiber field for outside US 2016 label purposes. So we'll continue to maintain those for, I would say, unforeseeable future. So again, just to reiterate that concept that if you're working with 1990 US label or outside of the US, including Canadian label, the 2016 format, you need to populate the total dietary fiber fields. And then if you're using the US 2016 label, you need to populate the dietary fiber 2016 field or fields if you're tracking insoluble and soluble. So those are necessary in order to pull forward to the label formats that you have selected. I hope that clears it up.
Absolutely. Our next question, which is kind of 2 questions, but very similar types of questions. Kind of question 1 or part 1, why does my label show dashes for dietary fiber? And then the second part of that question, why is the dietary fiber on my label less than it used to be, especially when transitioning from a 1990 label to a 2016 label?
Yes. Again, very common questions since we've seen all this change to dietary fiber recording and reporting. And again, we covered that dashes. If you see dashes on your label, you're missing the dietary fiber information, dietary fiber 2016 information for all of your ingredients. And then if you compared your 1990 and 2016 labels and there was a decrease in the dietary fiber, on the 2016 label, a decrease in the dietary fiber, it could be a couple things. So one would be that you're missing data in some of your nutrients. So again, reviewing the spreadsheet report to see if you have any dashes in your Dietary Fiber 2016 field. Or the other could be that what was once considered dietary fiber for 1990 labeling purposes is not all counted as dietary fiber for the 2016 label purposes. So there could be a slight decrease depending on your ingredients. If you just switch, if you have all data present, but just switch from one label to the other, or if you see a significant change, definitely again, check your spreadsheet, fill in the blanks.
You can see I pulled back up that spreadsheet report again just to kind of reiterate that. One other thing I didn't mention that I wanted to kind of point out too is you can tell which label you have open by, if you have the percent recommendations on the spreadsheet shown, which of the fiber fields are showing a percent. Now, the total fiber won't because it doesn't have a percentage on that label. Fiber 2016, since I'm making a 2016 label, has a percent DV. That's a quick reference there that I didn't point out. Our next question, should I enter both total dietary fiber and dietary fiber 2016 values?
And again, that goes back to that best practice of filling in as much information as you can. So certainly if you can populate those fields, enter total dietary fiber and dietary fiber 2016, as well as calculate or populate the non-digestible carbohydrates. So you have as much record keeping present as possible.
More data is better than less, absolutely. Question number 4, if I created my labels before the last guidance and I didn't count all of the fibers that now qualify, what should I do?
That's a great question. And again, we've had this with things like added sugars and a few other topics where the guidance has been continuing and changing. And so what we were working under even a few months ago has changed. So when we've had these various guidance documents released at different times and changes have been made, like to the list of dietary fibers, the FDA stated that they'll use enforcement discretion when considering the labeling of dietary fibers and these specific non-digestible carbohydrates. So as part of your record keeping, consider the labeling dates of your packaging. So when you applied labels to your packages, your product packages, and consider the published documentation at the time that your product packaging was labeled. You might want to just keep record of all of that documentation as part of your record keeping.
All right, and we have time for one more question. Our last question, is maltodextrin considered dietary fiber?
And this one, I'm going to refer you to your supplier product information. So we saw on the list of, we saw that the resistant maltodextrin and dextrins were on the list of dietary fibers for 2016 with that latest guidance. And it may be, like I said, that you need to contact your supplier and ask them specifically about the product description, if it meets one of those resistant classifications or not, and which. And then you want to gather all that documentation. So it's a little more than just a yes or no. It might be what type specifically of maltodextrin, what form is it, what's the processing. Get more detail from your supplier.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alicia. Thank you all for joining us today. I know there's probably a lot of questions out there. If we didn't get to your question and answer it during the webinar, feel free to reach out to us. Again, you've got our contact information right there. If you want to reach out to sales, support, consulting, reach out to us. We'll certainly answer those questions offline as well. Again, thank you all for joining us today and have a great day.